thank you, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. For those of you who missed Michael Parenti not but an hour ago, his lecture will be online, so you can check it out on the YouTube site. It's just UVU RSU. Let's see, the other announcement that I need to make is tonight in the library in 508, is that 509, excuse me, at 8 p.m. our friend Kai Cox, he's going to be giving a lecture on the Communist Manifesto. We'd encourage everyone to attend. And we have sign-up sheets there on the back near the cafes. We have pamphlets and newspapers, and again, we'd encourage you to check that out. This panel is the last one for the What is Capitalism conference. We have Alex Caldiero and David Newlin. They're going to be discussing the price of beauty. What are the effects of capitalism on art? Alex, here on your left, is a poet/artist whose residency is in Orem, Utah. He is a performance poet, musician, and visual artist who specializes in Mediterranean arts and folklore, as well as Western avant-garde traditions. He is also the subject of the documentary The Sonosifer, which is fantastic, and I'd recommend you all check it out. In addition, he has a large body of work, including poetry, writing, music, and various other performances. And our friend David Newlin is a UVU graduate in philosophy who has taken a detour into journalism. He has been a lifelong performer and writer of music, which he continues to do in his awesome band, John Ross Boyce and the Troubles. He is also a Marxist and a revolutionary. So without further ado, please put your hands together for our next panelists.
Hello. I have a prepared statement. It's now safe for you to turn off your computer. The Chinese woman I work with calls me Alice. I correct her and say, "It's Alex," stressing the x. She says, okay. 5 minutes later, she's calling me Alice again. After days of this, rather than correct her, I decide to answer to the name Alice. It's now safe for you to turn off your computer. I worry about money, about paying bills and making ends meet, about having enough, about not getting into debt, about borrowing, about money, and how it seems that it's all about money, that money means life, and that really gets me down because I know that's not true, but I can't feel otherwise. I know it's not true, but I can't think otherwise. And all the positive thoughts in the world can't help me, and all the prayers and good wishes can't help me, and money, worry and worry about what I owe, about what I'm going to do at the end of the month, and I got to borrow, and I worry, and it's only money. It's only money. Don't you think I know that? It's now safe for you to turn off your computer. You are everything you thought you'd never be. So you need a sense of humor. A sense of humor is necessary to understand how this can be that you end up just where you never wanted to be. It is safe for you to turn off your computer. The tongue goes right to where the tooth hurts. Don't be surprised at what others do, because you do the same and often do. And there you are before a mirror or before another person or by yourself, caught in a moment of deep meditation. There you are, yourself, and there's no hiding it. The grand secret, yes, Your own shit does smell. It's now safe to turn off your computer. Told your fear, told your worry, told your expectations, told your situation, told your mind and heart, told your body parts. No one to blame, no accuser or accused. It feels good to sit right here and look out of my head. Time enough to sleep, time enough to weep, time enough to keep going. It is now safe for you to turn off your computer. Thank you.
So, I've also got some semi-prepared remarks, which is basically, I decided to sort of look at how, this is all right with everybody, and I'll say too, given the low number of people here, like, I feel comfortable with being questioned and interrupted, like, mid-whatever, so we can, if that's all right with you, just be,
Perfect.
it's more like a conversation, that's totally fine with me. But to basically look at art in terms of how it's produced and how artists are produced in a capitalist society, which we're all pretty familiar with because I bet some of us are artists and we also live in a capitalist society, so hopefully all the terms will be well understood. But I think that the fundamental core of what I'm going to remark is that maybe even, definitely in a capitalist society, but maybe even art as such exhibits sort of liberal attitude with regard to thinking, right? It's a fundamentally liberal activity in order to engage in. And for those of you who are familiar with Marxism and anti-capitalism, you know what I mean by that. First, let's look at, say, like the level of production, how an actual work of art is produced. So it's certainly, in most cases, an individual, but not necessarily, who is supposed to be sort of creating something that is the expression of some sort of deep core of themselves, right? And even if that's not the intention, right? The idea is that each moment in which you're creating or producing a work of art, you're making a decision. And this decision, I think, mimics precisely the kind of decision-making that we engage in a capitalist society, right? What am I going to buy today? I've got X number of different options of things that I can get. And these are the preset options, you know, the different kinds of toothpaste that exist in the world, and I get to choose between one of those, and so therefore there are these, you know, freely chosen things that I'm engaging in. And the production of a work of art is in many ways the same thing. You have this sort of predefined history of what art is and what can be done in a given work of art. So if I'm making music, right, I have many different genres that I can choose from and many different instruments that I can choose from, but by and large these things are all sort of predetermined, right? And so by making a piece of art, I am then like, okay, well I will choose this instrument, I will choose this other thing, I will assemble this thing together from these apparently, at first, freely chosen activities, right? And this is supposed to represent something about myself. I'm supposed to be expressing something. Even if the intention is not necessarily to express something about myself, nevertheless, all of those choices can be brought back to an individual acting, right? And so the art then is a realization of a particular psychological subject with particular propensities and attitudes and, you know, ideas about themselves and about the art that they're creating. Yeah. And I've, you know, sort of already gone over the analogy. You can see the analogy here with, you know, liberal choice. The idea of liberal choice as opposed to free choice in the Leninist sense. Yeah.
I don't know. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we were talking. Somebody brought up the question: is art? And we were having a more religious discussion. They were saying, "Is art inherently blasphemous?" To which I said, "It is, because the implication is that the creation was not complete, you know, and you have to, you know, create something else." And applying it to a more political or economic sense, I would say, you know, like, you know, at least on a superficial level, art can be seen as revolutionary because, you know, inherently revolutionary because it is an act of, you know, saying this is how things are for me. That it's you know, putting forth this alternative idea. So in your idea, is this sort of an example of subversion and containment then? Do we kind of erroneously believe, I mean, like, is this kind of the liberal thinking that we're thinking, like, we erroneously believe that this is like a very free and revolutionary or, you know, like, you know, individualistic, autonomous thing, but really we've got all of these predetermined.
Yeah, I'm extremely sympathetic to that last point of view. And that's sort of the core of what I'm getting at, is that it's really easy to think of what you're doing as an artist as necessarily revolutionary and subversive, but really what you're doing is, I mean, by and large you have, and I mean I'll talk a little bit later about Badiou and what his sort of thesis is for what is really revolutionary, and that can be applied to art, but I don't think that that's really the case for most artists, basically. Like, we think that we're engaging in this revolutionary activity, but really all of these free choices that we have are all predetermined. What would be revolutionary in, say, Badiou's sense, would be to change the actual coordinates of what it means to choose in the first place, right? So no longer do you have these predetermined choices brought to you by a whole history of art, a whole history of creating things. Rather, you like subvert that in and of itself and completely change how it's produced in the first place. What the choices are to be chosen from.
Sounds like it sounds like the only true artists can be feral children.
What was that? Yeah. So I mean that is what I would say would be revolutionary. But even this, I'm suspicious of as being useful in a political realm, right? So since we're talking about capitalism, obviously, and I'm a revolutionary, obviously this is going to come back to revolution at some point. And like, if you want to jump in at any time, like, don't let me prevent you. But so we talked about that. But there's another thing to be talked about as well, which is under what conditions is art produced? And maybe a better way of asking that question is, how do we produce artists in our current society, right? And so I'm just going to draw an analogy with, I always forget how to pronounce her last name, but Renata Salekel, I think. She's a Slovenian philosopher. I think she was like married to Zizek at one point, but I'm not sure about that. But she has this strong critique of the idea of charity in a capitalist society, in that ultimately what humanitarian aid and charity are a way for a capitalist to get away with fixing something that they broke with their left hand that they broke with their right hand, basically. Like, you take with one hand and then you give with another.
It's chocolate laxative.
Yeah, it's the chocolate laxative, basically. The thing becomes its own solution to the problems that it creates. And so if we look at how art is produced, there's something very similar going on there, right? So even at this university, just last year, there were, I think, 32 pianos donated to the music department, each of which were like $200,000 like Steinway pianos, very expensive. Something that the university couldn't do on its own, and so a rich benefactor, I believe, although the university says that it wasn't, was the guy who used to own WordPerfect. I forget his name. But he's a big, supporter of the arts. He gave millions of dollars in pianos to the University of Utah as well. And this is how we basically support the arts, right? We're always under the purview of basically rich capitalists who sort of, beneficently, give to us so that we can produce art. Even at public institutions like this, right? And you can look at it in a number of other different examples, like the Ford Foundation is a big supporter of the arts, the Gates Foundation is a big supporter of the arts. But at the same time, these are the same sorts of people who are proposing that we engage in activities that seem, at least on the surface, to be sort of against the idea of art, right? Art as a commodified object that can be bought and sold, that loses something in its reproduction, right? These are the people that make that happen, and they absolutely advocate that that should be done in art too. And so in some sense they're hurting artists, and then give right back. Let's go support the arts, and let's donate money to the symphony so that people can go see it. Let's donate money to the museum so that the public can go see it, right? So there's this sort of guise of doing something that's good for the public even while doing something that's really bad for artists, or the public of artists that's out there, right? So then it seems in the way that artists are produced in this way, and I mean, it's not even just like public institutions, right? Like actual artists get specific grants to do specific art for themselves, and it's even often very radical and subversive art. But that's the entire point is, well, we're not bad capitalists, we're not bad people, you know, we will even support something that is against us ideologically because, you know, we like culture and we want to support culture. And so you can see, again, the very people who are doing bad things for our culture, or at least we would like to say are doing bad things for our culture, are the solution to that very same problem, right? Let's see if I got anything more to say about that. Well, I mean, and if you want to reduce that all to like one statement, basically that's a way to mediate the internal contradictions of capitalism as it presents itself in the field of art, right? In the same way that charity would be a way to mediate the internal contradictions of capitalism, i.e. it can't provide for everybody in the field of, you know, political economics, right? So that's sort of the analogy there. We talked a little bit about the level of reproduction because I said, you know, that ultimately art is a commodified, you know, platform delivery service for aesthetics, and that's what capitalism wants it to be. And more of these things aren't just like you take a picture of, you know, say like a really great painting and then reproduce it. The art itself is designed to encompass the reproduction in and of itself, right? You take a digital photograph, it's almost as though the reproductions of that photograph aren't reproductions. I mean, they're identical in every conceivable way to the original. So the reproduction is itself inserted into the art. For those of you who are much more familiar with Benjamin, there might be something to be said about that. I'm really not, so somebody will have to like come in and explain what the implications of that are for me, given what he wrote on the subject. But yeah, so that's sort of how it goes on the level of reproduction, right? It's something designed to be bought and sold. So are there any questions or comments or anything up to this point? Because there's more. There's even more. I can keep going.
To get back to your talk about charity, to me, it's where does it become, one, relieving the guilt, and where does it come just a PR movement just to get people off their back?
I think it's always all of those at the same time, right? I mean, it accomplishes all of those tasks. And without them, let's say a capitalist ever having to actually think like, oh, I'm really guilty about the things that I've done. Before that even happens, it's already a system which allows the guilt to basically be removed, right? If you want to think about it in terms of guilt. Before you even get to that point, you've already got a way for that, I guess, well, maybe probably not catharsis, but you've got an outlet for that, right? Which is, you know, say supporting the arts in this situation, or in charity, it would be humanitarian.
So that's PR movement in itself there.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at it in terms of that. I mean, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. I mean, for instance, the guy who donated all the pianos to UVU, he didn't want his name released. I happen to think it's the Word Perfect guy because I did a lot of research and I wrote a story about it for the newspaper. Because he also happens to be homosexual, and I had some suspicions that maybe his name wasn't released because the university didn't want to be associated with a public homosexual. But it turns out not to be the case. He really just didn't even want his name to be out there. So even then, that doesn't really change the fundamental situation of what they're doing, right? Even if it's not a public act, the structural situation is the same, that you have, you know, a rich capitalist who's supporting the arts. And that's the way in which it is allowed to be done, right? He's producing artists. But then we also have the level of consumption of the art, right? So like on the user end, as it were. That's what we say at my ridiculous job. I shouldn't say that on the internet. It's a great job. How do we consume art? Well, I mean, we have to talk about commodities again, right? Because we're going to buy it, by and large. Or if we're not going to buy it, we're going to buy some sort of, or we're going to obtain some sort of reproduction of it that's been circulating on the internet, you know, either music or visual art or something like that. But again, you can see that there's this clear sort of alignment with a liberal attitude, right? In that the consumption of the art is always going to be a subjective psychological experience, right? Even when you're doing it in a group. The whole reason to consume art, I think, this would be a thesis that I'm throwing out there and that we can discuss, but I think that the whole reason for consuming art is because art tells oneself something about oneself, right? So the way to think about it would be, say, more and more in capitalism, we're not just buying products, we're buying lifestyles that are associated with the product, right? So if you buy a particular brand, yeah, it has some sort of use value for you, right? Like I buy a shirt that says Abercrombie & Fitch, I'm actually going to wear it. But the consumption of that act doesn't end when you purchase it. It continues onward, right? And you're wearing it publicly, and it signifies something about you to other people, right? And so part of the consumptive act is to be consuming something that's signifying you to other people. But I think the interesting thing about art is that it has exactly this property, but it's inward looking, right? It signifies something about you, but it's signifying it to yourself, right? So I like this particular artist because he makes me feel this particular way, or he engages in art that has this kind of idea associated with it. And that is helping me to form myself as a psychological subject. Yeah?
Could art reflect or self-reflect a particular group and not just the individual?
It can, right? Because, I mean, you, like, say a band is more than one individual that's producing that art.
Right.
But in the consumptive act, it's just you engaging with the art, right? And so there's this, separation between you and the artists, in most cases, not entirely, right? So, like, a performance piece is sort of different, or a kind of art which, brings these sort of things together, where communication between individuals is actually a part of the art.
Right.
Yeah, but as soon as that ends, right, as soon as that's over, it's then, this internal psychological subjective thing where the act of consumption is telling you something about yourself. Yeah?
I think the consumption of art is definitely a self-reflexive thing, but also has the same properties as the consumption of a commodity can signify. It's not what you're like anymore, it's what you like. If you friend somebody on Facebook, for example, commonly what a lot of people are going to do is they're going to go like, oh, well, what is this person like? I'm going to tell you about myself by telling you what art I like. I'm going to express myself through the expression of other people.
Yeah.
So I know when I go on like somebody's Facebook, like if they like horror movies and Tom Waits and black metal and Kurt Vonnegut books, I'll probably get along with them, or at least that's the initial assumption.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know anything about that person as an individual. I don't know what they're like. I don't know, how they're going to act in certain situations. But it still is like this. Oh, you like cherry soda? I like cherry soda. Now we can be friends. We're on the same. It's a uniform. We're on the same team.
Yeah.
It's a jersey.
I think that's totally true, and I think that takes place. Except that isn't necessarily part of the actual act of consumption itself, right? And that's why I think it's slightly different from other commodities that are sort of like the buying and selling of lifestyles, like lifestyle commodities, you might call them, because the consumption is ongoing, right? The consumption is signifying something to other people. But once you start talking about the things that you like as art, you're no longer engaging with the art necessarily as itself. You're just talking with somebody else about your particular psychological subjective tastes, right? And so it's no longer, you're not consuming the art when you're doing that. You're just talking about consuming art. And so there's like just one level of separation that is different from, say, like, wearing a shirt that says Abercrombie & Fitch, the example I keep going back to. And so the problem then becomes, how do you get, because as a Marxist, you want to get out of this, right? You don't want to be thinking of yourself as a single, subject that's, like, atomized and is only, exists in this particular space and have, like, these propensities that are, like, predetermined for you, right? And I guess that's where I'm, like, either ambivalent or just straight up cynical about the power of art to change that about us, because it seems to me, at least, that by and large, that is art, right? It is specifically telling yourself something about yourself and doesn't necessarily engage with, say, somebody else, or change that liberal attitude of being like an atomized little thing, that's choosing things. Like, I can choose all sorts of different kinds of art and, like, build up my deep self based on that, right? But ultimately, all that art's already out there, right? And I'm just sort of like, there's nothing that I've done to, like, change the field of what the choices are to begin with in the act of consuming the art, right? As for making art, that's a little bit more complicated, and that's something that we'll have to talk about, because I don't have a lot here to say about that. But yeah, so that's sort of my views on art as consumption. But yeah, more, if you guys want it, or we can just chat for a while. I don't want to, like, take up everybody's, intellectual space. So moving on, there's I think I would, in a very simplistic but I think useful way, categorize art broadly in two different fields. You basically have establishment art and anti-establishment art. And notice I don't say capitalist art and anti-capitalist art, because I think that those aren't useful terms. I think ultimately all art is sort of a byproduct of the society, and not a byproduct, that sort of demeans it as though it weren't important, but is secondary to the society in which it's created, right?
Absolutely.
And so for that reason I want to say establishment and anti-establishment, because even anti-capitalist art is ultimately you know, secondary to the capitalist society in which it was created, and in many ways, I think I'll show in a minute, ultimately capitalist, right? Ultimately supporting a capitalist agenda. So so establishment art and anti-establishment art. Basically, I think what one does is posit say establishment art, posits an idea of what a society is or ought to be, and then venerates it in some way. Basically, by producing this art, the message would be then, this is the kind of society that I do want, and I support this, and that's great. Whereas, you know, anti-establishment is just the opposite of that, right? You posit some sort of society or way society is or ought to be, and then you say, this is bad, I don't want this to be the case. And you try and communicate that through your art. I think that, you know, establishment art's pretty easy to analyze under just this narrow rubric, right? Because, you know, you see something like, say, John McLaughlin? The guy who painted the picture of Obama stepping on the Constitution. What was that?
Is it McNaughton?
McNaughton, yeah. And it's pretty clear what he's and this is an interesting case because it's actually doing both at the same time. He is positing a society which really does exist, which is, you know, your traditional American imperialist capitalist society. But at the same time, he's also setting up something that's, in a way, anti-establishment, because he posits Obama as the establishment and we need to fight him. So in a weird way, I mean, it's never always one or the other, right? Like, say, John McNaughton is doing both at the same time. So that's like an example of, say, establishment art. Anti-establishment art, I think more and more these days, takes on the form of, say, representing particular acts of, say, oppression or repression or, you know, capitalist horribleness or whatever. So there's a really funny example, if you guys have ever seen the TV show Saxondale, which if you haven't, you should totally watch it because it's super funny. The main character's name is Tommy, and he and his girlfriend, whose name is Max, go to an art show, because she's an artist, and so she's, you know, going to look at all the other artists. They walk by this painting, and it's a painting of George W. Bush in the Oval Office, they're like, oh wow, that's a really cool painting, I mean, such detail. Oh, but if you look really, really closely at the carpet, every single, you know, strand of the carpet's an African baby. Oh, what does that say about art, right? And so the clear idea is like, oh, Bush really hates Africa and he's doing really horrible things for Africa. I think this is more and more what, you know, anti-establishment art, quote unquote, is doing, right? It's positing some sort of situation that's really bad. Like, there's this person's racist, or this situation's racist, or this situation is sexist, or we need to be against this, that, or the other, right? But at no point it just doesn't seem to me, at least, that there's any sort of like universal alignment with, you know, structural truth about being against capitalism, right? And moreover, given what I've said about liberal attitudes, I don't know that it can get at that point, right? Like, well, I'll put it in another way. So, right, this consumptive act is necessarily like self-referential and involves only you. Ultimately, what that turns any piece of art into is a fetishization, right? All art is inherently fetishized in that it always comes to stand in for your relationship with yourself. Like, this piece of art says something to me about myself, and that's purely Marx's notion of fetishism, right? Except that he says it about commodities, right, which stand in for relationships with other people, whereas art stands in for your relationship with yourself, right? And so insofar as art is always doing that, I'm not sure that art can do the political action that we would want, say, as a revolutionary Marxist, which I am, to sort of change the whole coordinates of how politics works in the first place, to give new choices where there were none before, right? Because it's always inherently fetishized, I don't know if it can do that. But that's also not to, you know, denigrate the fact that art's extremely important for people, right? I mean, there's no reason not to make art. It's just that it's not necessarily a revolutionary act in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would like to think that art is a cog in the wheel of revolution, and that, and you touched on this, like, greatly, that art reflects a certain, you know, economic status, at least to some extent, perhaps if it's not explicitly anti-capitalist. But actually Josh, and you should talk more about this, because he actually gave an amazing lecture on it, about how the art during the Russian Revolution reflected a certain type of ascension, and where, I can't put it in a good way.
Yeah, I was talking about Walter Benjamin, right? And like his thing, he talks about like he raises the dichotomy between fascist art and communist art, and basically, like with fascist art, it's like the rule of aesthetics, right? It's the aesthetics, essentially, I don't know how else to put it. Yeah, like essentially the aesthetics of the society, right, of like Nazi Germany. Like that was the kind of thing that stirred people to act in favor of Germany, because it was like all about, like, if you watch like the Lenny Reifenstahl movie, it's all about like how these beautiful German people worshiping their great like Führer and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I tried to, and he says so let's see, what is Benjamin's actual quote? He's like, fascism aestheticizes politics, whereas communism politicizes aesthetics. And so it's like, to give a counterexample of that, the two main things I came up with of like a communist art would have been like the Russian constructivists and the Mexican muralists, right, who essentially were putting their art in the service of the people, right? The people rose up and then they took control essentially of like the aesthetic apparatus and used it to create these great public works and things like that. I don't know.
That's much better than I could have put it.
So, what are we talking about? It seems to me that the only revolutionary thing I've heard is that you're going around in circles, and revolving, and going around in circles. And let me see if I could break this circle. My goodness. Let me catch my breath. I mean, I've never heard such a stream of bullshit in my whole life. My God, no wonder I stay away from meetings like this, like the plague. Like the fucking plague, man. This kind of horseradish that I've been listening to for the past half hour. I mean, horseradish, man. Like unprecedented in my life. No wonder I wouldn't belong to a club that would have me as a member. So, let me ask you a question, since you have no questions of me. Because after all, I mean, you'd rather talk about art than say anything about art. Art. So I make this little thing that I gave to you at the beginning. So let me ask you a question. You didn't consume it at all. You didn't even taste it. You invite me to bring a dish to serve to you. And you had rather go for the bullshit. I mean, I don't get this. You guys are amazing. It's a good thing not many people came here. I'm not surprised. I mean, what kind of horseradish is this, man? I gave you a fucking piece of my soul here, right? I made it. I offer it to you, and you don't even take a little taste. You don't even go for a little taste of it. What's going on, man? I'm asking you, you and you, and you. What is going on here, man? That you would rather listen and continue the prattle when you don't want to eat the fucking food that was put at the table. There's something very, very rotten in Denmark. when we prefer intellectual gibberish to food, to poetry? What is wrong with us? Has capitalism, man, infiltrated all your souls, man? It has eaten you up. You're all victims of it. And you don't even know it. You think you're revolutionary. My ass. I gotta hear this guy. I'm revolutionary. 4 or 5 times. I'm revolutionary. Well, you're not. You're all rotten inside. And capitalism has gotten to your fucking souls. There's nothing revolutionary about this revolutionary club. Wake up! I brought you poetry, damn it! And you didn't even know it! Because you've been so blinded by the very subject you claim to condemn and be revolutionary. Wake up! So answer my question, man. I'm asking you, what's the meaning of this? I've been listening, man, for the past 30 minutes. And I haven't heard anything addressing the fucking problem. Yes.
Would you like to address the problem for us?
I did. In what I read at the opening of this. That's my take on the problem of capitalism versus revolution and making a living. Didn't you hear what I said? Trying to make a fucking living in a system that eats away at you all the time. And trying to be human. That's what that poem was about. Trying to remain human in the face of everyday problems, in the face of paying my rent, in the face of paying my bills, trying to remain human while I'm making a living, while I'm being exploited, while I'm being fucked up the ass by the system, trying to retain my breathing space, trying to save my family, my life. That's the problem, man. And I spoke it in plain American English.
I think that's the problem we're addressing. That you read this poem and it was a beautiful poem, but it's...
It wasn't a beautiful poem.
Whatever you want.
Don't give me this aesthetic bullshit.
Whatever the fuck.
I don't even want to call it a poem.
It's not revolutionary, though. It didn't affect...
You don't know what revolutionary is. It didn't affect this revolutionary. Stop using that fucking word, would you please?
Why? It didn't change anything.
For you, because you weren't even listening. This poem allows me, it changes me enough to carry on one more day. So don't tell me that didn't change and make, it didn't do anything for you, apparently it didn't. It didn't do anything for any of you. And you know, that's okay. It's a gift. It's a gift. You refuse it, that's cool. That's right, it didn't change your life. If you cannot be changed by poetry, you ain't gonna be changed by nothing. Don't you get it? If you cannot be changed by poetry, you're not gonna change at all. Not by politics, not by anything. Poetry is the human soul breathing, making itself a reality. I'm not talking about a poem, a beautiful poem. This aesthetic crap that devaluates it and it's only a capitalistic ploy. It's okay. It's okay. This is a gift. You don't want it. That's fine. You would rather, you know, Benjamin. Leave the fucking Benjamin alone. If I hear him quote it one more time, I'm going to go through the roof. God. You know, I just don't believe it. And I reiterate it again. You know, you cannot, change comes from within outward, and that's why poetry is going in and outward. Period. Period. You want to keep looking for systems. You want to keep looking to bash on something out there, go ahead. Go ahead. It's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Could the same be said of visual art coming from within to the out?
Of course! When I say poetry, I mean poesis, the act of making. Making something that is not for consumption this way. It's for consumption this way. See, that's why it's revolutionary. Because it's consumed not through the mouth like everything else is. It's consumed through the skin, directly into the body, in and out. And it bypasses all the rules of capitalism. It subverts capitalism. It is the only way to fucking subvert this gigantic monster called mankind. As E. Cummings says, this vicious monster called mankind. Capitalism, one of its nicknames. That's the way you subvert it, man. You don't subvert it any other way. You don't subvert it by ideologies. You don't subvert it by trying to beat it at its own game. It's a monster, man. It's a monster. You don't want to be Frankenstein. You don't want to be Frankenstein.
David, what are you thinking?
Well, I'll start with I got a story. I once made a friend of mine some chicken strips. Just microwave them and put them in front of him, and he looked at them and he went, "So how do I do this?" Like, he just didn't know how to eat chicken strips. I kind of find myself in the same position, right? Like, it seems like amazing. Who doesn't know how to eat chicken strips? And I sort of find myself in the same position with regard to what Alex said. Like, maybe I just don't know something as basic as how to eat chicken strips. Or, in this case, with regard to, like, art, right? Maybe he's presented something to me and I've just looked at it and gone, so how do I do this? Right? And it seems like you kind of said that right at the beginning, right? Like, you didn't consume what I had given you. But I don't know, I don't disagree with what you said, that it comes in like this, right? Absorbed through the skin. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that's part of what I was trying to get at, right? Like, I don't, like, the actual act of making art and consuming art just falls completely outside of the rubric of capitalism itself, right? And you can commodify something, and you can sell it, and you can buy it, and that's all fine and good, but it doesn't get at what the actual act of, like, doing art is, right?
Well, not the way you described it. You described it as, not even as a process. You described it as, not even as an action. You described it as kind of, I got some things, I got some ideas, I want to put them together. It's so thought out, it's things pre-existing. You put them together and you kind of, how were you describing it in the beginning? It was this matter of fact. Like you were putting together a car. Like you were putting together, a chair. Like you were, well, that's not the process I know. Although it's the process that I recognize in what I call career artists.
Well, I thought this was going to be kind of a discussion on how commercialism...
Exactly. Career artists, they want to play with capitalism.
And commercial art back in the 70s.
Yeah, they want to play with it and say,
Just the idea to make more money has turned art into not something as a personal creative process, but a creative process for your overlords so they can make more money and throw you a little bit. And the act of art, creation of art, does not become a personal act, but a corporate act
or even when you said it was a personal act, you typified it by self-reflective, a fetish. You know, it goes it's totally subjective. That ain't the way either.
Well, if you're selling a car, you want to add, well, yeah, you got precept thing. You got to have a car in the ad. You got to have a pretty girl. That always helps. And some line of bullshit that tells you why this car is better than the Chevy or the Pontiac or whatever.
See, for me, art as a commodity is a contradiction in terms.
And it becomes not so much an art as a piece of mind control in a very real sense, propaganda, rather than make people think inwardly and question something. It turns it into an idea where it's not to question but to accept. And this art becomes a vehicle for that acceptance.
Do you know what happened in Russia as soon as the creative process ended and the revolution was over? Fucking Mayakovsky blew his brains out! Damn it! He blew his brains out! What started out to be a revolutionary, incredible process in Russia and the Russian Revolution. And some of the most incredible art that was happening. And it was real art. It wasn't begging. It wasn't commodified. It wasn't serving. It was serving the people. For real. But as soon as that fucking capitalism came in the form of communism, at that time, he blew his brains out.
Well, if you remember, I was talking specifically about the early days of the Russian Revolution, as well as people like, Diego in Mexico after their revolution, people like Diego Rivero and Alvaro Sequeiros, right? Like, to me, that's real art. It was avant-garde. They were like out there.
Exactly.
Also trying to find creative ways in which you could have art serve people as opposed to serve capital and things like that.
And it always ends up that it's a commodity. One of the most insidious characteristics of capitalism is that it will appropriate for its own ends almost anything. Almost anything. Mother Teresa even. It will use her. Called the Catholic Church, by the way. A capitalist institution, if I've ever seen one. They even take a saint. You understand? They even take a saint and eat her up.
I think living in this capital site, any artist ends up being guilty of commodifying their art, whether they want to or not. I mean, I've made T-shirts before with pretty much anti-establishment ideas, and I tried to sell them, and well, I can't. People are too afraid of the ideas, which is rather disappointing. Yeah, especially when they'll go on about the Obama's going to ruin the First Amendment, and they're too goddamn chicken shit to wear a T-shirt that's anti-war or just something that they're afraid somebody's going to point a finger at them at. But yeah, I'm guilty of commodifying art, but it costs me money to make it because this is a capitalist society. And
in order not to commodify art, I will do what I described in that poem. I will put myself through what I described in that poem. And am putting myself through what I described in that work. In order not to commodify it. And it might be a failure from the very beginning. But you see, it's the attempt that is everything. Because the attempt, again, is from the inside out. Ideologies will not help us. They just won't. They just won't.
Like, when you were speaking of, say, the revolutionary art that was going on in early Russia, I think that that's an implication, or an implication of what I was saying is, yeah, there can be revolutions in art. And of course, like, we should seek those out and be revolutionary in our art. I just don't know how politically useful it is, except for in the sense of changing oneself, right?
As soon as it becomes politically useful, you blow your brains out.
And I wouldn't disagree with that statement at all, right? Like, and again, like, I'm in a band, right? Like, I play music all the time, right? And I take my art very, very seriously. And I don't treat it as a vehicle for my Marxist ideas either, right? That's not why I'm doing it. And that's not why I continue to do it. In a certain sense, I just think that art is almost epiphenomenal to politics. Again, with the exception of what it does to you and makes you think as a particular individual person. But I don't think it's a vehicle for revolutionary change. Outside of the realm of the art itself.
Change is possible.
But I mean, it is. I mean, there have been artistic revolutions. I mean, we know that.
The Dada's came pretty close.
Well, I mean, do you think there has been a genuine, like, just complete field change in some realm of art somewhere? Where just the whole coordinates of how it works just change completely?
Yeah, there have been changes. Yeah, I would say. There have been changes of a revolutionary kind. Yeah.
I'm wondering about this train wreck we had between art and theory. Mm-hmm. And David, I know you love art, and I know Alex loves Walter Benjamin. Just through the work on Baroque drum, for instance. So, what happened?
Wait, sorry.
Well, you guys were on the same track. You were just going the opposite ways, and then you blew up. I mean, Alex blew it up, but you set it up in whatever ways that made it happen. So, how do two guys who practice art and who like theory end up in this train wreck? I think it's a really interesting thing that happened. And David, it's making me rethink what you said in interesting ways. And Alex, it's making me, I missed your poem. Sorry.
It's okay, so did they. It's okay.
Okay.
At least you weren't here. I forgive you.
Well, they had the courtesy to be here. So something set you off, Alex, with the way David was talking. And what's David, while you were setting him off, and stuff was going on inside you because of the way Alex was talking. And I think it may be really interesting. I'm wondering where you guys take it.
Well, for me, it's simply a bad job of moderation, monitoring the discussion.
No, there was something going on in those, I think, in the words David was using and the way he was using them.
Oh, that too. Oh, boy.
What was it?
Well, you know, there were too many words like revolutionary. I am a revolutionary.
It felt like a theoretical cliche?
Not a cliche, an arrogant overstatement. And I'm being really, I'm sorry.
Well, that's fine. I mean, and to be clear, I don't have a problem necessarily with a little bit of hubris, right? Because there's always people in the world to take you and put you back in your place, right? Like, I don't have to worry about that, you know? So, I mean, yeah, it may very well have been arrogant. But hey, I don't know the limits of my arrogance until they're pointed out to me, so there's that. What my goal was, I guess, because I mean, your question requires that I sort of specify what my goal was. So, I guess my goal was to sort of, the underlying thing is like, I really don't like this idea, and I've criticized it a little bit, and by saying specifically that I don't use my art for any revolutionary political purposes, I don't like that idea of using art for that purpose. I don't like the idea of anti-establishment art, right? Where like the whole point of the art is to be against like the system of capitalism in the art itself, right? That bugs me in a lot of ways, and I think it's totally confusing. And I think it confuses people and makes them think that they're doing things that they're not with their art. And so I guess where I was coming from in constructing this the way that I did was to sort of lay out, you know, from the beginning of the little that I understand of both art and Marxism, like why that just isn't the case. I guess that's where I was coming from, because I just hate that idea. I hate the idea of using art for something I don't think it was intended to be used for.
I would definitely agree with you 100% like that. Of course.
Yeah.
See, I do art like I shit, like I eat, like I breathe. It's another essential action to my humanity. I don't do art to change the world, to start a revolution. You know, I do art to get through one more day. You know, I do art because it does me. You know, you know, it's outside of the, you know, I pay my blood money to capitalism. I work. I have a job. I've always had a job. I work. You know, I pay my pound of flesh. You know? Yes.
Maybe I'm just wrong in misquoting you. Correct me if that's the case. You've said that if art is not revolutionary, there is no revolution, and then you just said art is not a means for revolution. So it seems that you're saying revolution is pointless, it's hopeless if it doesn't happen. If there's no other vestibule than art, and art isn't it, then to me that it's pretty straightforward. There's no such. It's not going to happen. I think
well, it depends what you mean by revolution.
I mean a break with the current system of social relations.
That's not going to happen.
Fair enough.
That's not going to happen.
I entirely disagree, but fair enough. I understand.
Of course you would disagree with it, because you're, you know, idealistic and dreaming. You know, that's okay.
Somebody's got to do it, because all you other guys get beat up enough, you quit on us.
So you
and then come to our establishments and yell at us, like, I mean, like.
So you know what you got to do to change that? You got to change yourself.
We're working on that, you know.
Then work on that. That's plenty. That keeps you plenty busy.
That's just
trying to change yourself.
That's just asking me to individualize myself and remove myself from a community.
No.
That's not what we're trying to do.
No.
That's not what we're trying to do.
The very opposite. I've been in a community.
Well,
I've lived in a community.
Okay, well, why don't you...
Where every individual had an interaction with everybody else.
Well, then you've never been to the RSU, because we do a pretty good job discussing with each other and staying on each other's pages, working, providing support for each other. This is my family. I don't have a family here. I moved up from... I've been working since I was 17. I moved here. I have no family here.
I think that's great.
I work on my own, and this has been one of my families.
I wouldn't...
But then you come and shit on it, like what we're doing is insulting to you in some way. And instead of providing us with constructive criticism, you give us this big rant about how fucked up we are, and how we have so much to learn from you, apparently, because you figured it all out. But I mean, like,
really?
Talk straight to
us. You think I gave you the impression that I figured anything out?
Yes. Let me explain that comment.
Well, again, you've just proven my point again.
No, let me
just continue to tell me that you didn't listen to what I fucking first said to begin with. I don't believe this bull. You're starting to bullshit again.
No.
Stop it, man. Listen.
Let me share with
what time is this thing over?
You got 15 minutes.
15 minutes. All right. Listen. I made my statement just like he made a statement and wouldn't fucking stop. Okay? Out of rudeness and out of his own mania, he went on and on and on and on to the point where I was going berserk. That's why it was a moderation problem. You're supposed to have 10 minutes. You make your statement. You get some response. You enter a conversation.
And I'm trying.
You don't. Now it's a bit too late almost.
Now you're yelling at me and cutting me off. You're the teacher here. Show some restraint. Show some maturity.
No. I'm not going to show any restraint. You're all too restrained.
This is...
My God. You're all too revolutionary for me. You're too restrained.
You're too artistic for us.
Exactly. Right.
Magical and mystic and wonderfully in tune with this. I mean, I gotta leave my own meeting.
Please. You left 35 minutes ago, man.
No, not at all. I mean, all right. Now you have me. I'll say.
As far as I'm concerned.
I'm right here.
Not as far as these guys are concerned.
Yeah, not as far as the people that are doing things in the community are concerned. And I know you're an artist. I've been to all your shows, and I like your work. I'm just confused as why you're attacking us and why we can't have a discussion. Why you're yelling at each other here. I'm trying to understand your position on revolution. This is supposed to be about capitalism and revolution.
That's what I thought.
I'm a student. You're a teacher. You're artist in resident. We all.
I am also a student.
Like,
as a matter of fact, I took some really nice notes, and then thank you. I mean, this is really nice.
Well, just to be fair though, I do want to say. I mean, I hope I wasn't rude. I mean, I tried to.
No, because you were too compulsive. You got into your rant, like I'm into it now. I'm into a rant.
and now you're rude.
You know, exactly.
Fair enough.
You know, so rudeness versus, like I said, this is a poor job of moderating. You know, the moderator, the guy that kind of guides the discussion. That's all it is.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I'm here to kind of, understand other people's viewpoints on things. We've talked a lot about ways that art should not be used. I mean, we're here talking about art, right? So, but I haven't heard anything about the correct uses, what it's for, what's it for if it's not supposed to be a vehicle for anything. What is it? What's the point of it? What's the point?
Are you talking to me?
I'm talking to anybody who wants to answer. I mean, I guess anybody who's you're an artist, so yeah. What is it for? Is it just to express yourself? Because I just don't think we've covered exactly what it's for. We've covered exactly what it's not for. I've heard a lot of that, but I'm just curious to know what the opposite is.
Well, according to what I've been saying, it is a natural process of your body. It's a natural process of what what's your breathing for? You know, why do you go to the bathroom? Why do you eat? Why do you want to make love? You know, why do you do any? For me, art is on that level. You know, so it serves that very fundamental purpose. That's why it's completely incompatible with capitalism, and it always will be.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually 100% agree with that statement that it's just something that comes out of you in the same way that breathing does. But the only thing that I would add is that your breathing tells you something about yourself too, right? Mm-hmm. And in that same way, if art is simply a part of being human, it is an expression of humanity as such, then the art that you produce ought to be saying something about being human and humanity mm-hmm. as such, right? And that, I think, is the point of art, and that is what it's supposed to do. And there's all sorts of implications of that, like it can make you feel in certain ways, or it can make you do certain things, or any number of stuff like that. But the core of it is you talking about being human, right? Or even if not talking, right? Just doing something human that you can then learn more about being human from.
And so it's like that. You do that thing, right? And then you don't discuss it. You see, it's like you just made love, okay? And then you go and say, well, my penis, was just hard enough, and how was it for you? And we go this, well, let's take some pictures, and let's analyze exactly how this worked. You think, it's like that. It's like that. It's an intimate action as much as it affects everybody. I mean, this is the contradiction. This is the contradiction. Yes, I contradict myself. I contain myriads. Mr. Whitman.
I was just asking for a clarification.
Well, that's the point. That clarifications are very, very, number one, when you've been touched, you don't need it.
I wasn't here for your comments late.
It's all right.
I do apologize.
What bothers me, I guess, at the heart of it, okay, what really bothers me, and I to cut to the chase, is that I'm questioning, myself, and I'm questioning you. I guess you've been to a party where you bring a salad and nobody eats it.
Sure.
That's been my experience here today. And it was a great salad, I thought. I spent a lot of time on it. I wanted to share it. And nobody ate it. And that's bugging the crap out of me. Why not? And at first I said, well, maybe it's not a bad salad. Or maybe I'm in a room of carnivores, you know, and they only eat meat. You know, I don't know what to make of it. You know, I'm really bona fidely puzzled that we just went on. You see, after 10 minutes, I did my 6 minutes, you know, and I was very polite. You know, my 6 minutes, I didn't even take my full 10, you know. And then he began, and the nature of his discourse, you said, what bugs me about it is that it is addictive to words for their own sake. It is addictive to the mind and not to the soul or the heart. Your thinking takes over, and there it goes. It's a machine. You could have gone on for another 2 freaking hours. Seriously. You could have gone on for another 8 hours. And it wouldn't have mattered. And you know, most of you really were digging on it. So I said, man, did I come to the wrong party? You know, did I come to the wrong party? Did I bring the wrong dish? I mean, these guys are not into vegetarian cooking. I mean, they're into, you know, this heavy meat. This heavy meat. You know what I mean? Your words are heavy meat.
I would agree with that completely.
You know, they're heavy meat, man. They got a lot of fat in it. You know, for every 1 word you say 8. You know, for every 8 you say 20. You know, they're meat, very in the beef. You know, you're too heavy for me, man. Too heavy.
I, on the other hand, was enjoying David and his mind able to move from notes in this.
Oh, he's great.
And I thought, when I said earlier,
like I said, for hours he could have gone on. You know. That's why I finally had to do something. I was going insane.
But for the record, I was about
what?
When I said earlier,
not getting enough attention to an attention that I was right, that I was deserving. Okay?
So
let's not reduce it into a psychological bullshit.
Were you expecting a 10-minute pause as we sat in awe of your poem?
No, I expected a question. I expected a conversation.
I thought you said that we weren't supposed to analyze the act, right? That's like looking
a question is not an analysis. All right? You're wondering. You're thinking. There was none of that. Well, okay. Like I said, I came to the wrong party.
my point was, the point I wanted to make earlier when I said you're young, there's something just fantastic about being young, and when you're 62, like Alex and I are, that there's a certain jealousy that as we look back. But what I liked was you trying out ideas and trying out words, and if you've been seeing them for 40 years, they're going to sound different. And I'm putting aside what you
No, I took notes. I liked a lot of the things you had done.
I would have guessed it.
I'm not the what?
I would have guessed that you did.
Yeah, I don't, anything of value, I do not disregard.
Well, yeah, I mean, admittedly, I did ask myself before I started, well, shoot, what sort of format are we doing here? I mean, is this like something we both just say what we came to say and then discuss it afterwards, or should I immediately respond to what his poem was?
I asked the same thing.
Yeah.
And you said, you do 10 minutes, you do 10 minutes, and then we open it up for a discussion. Well, that opening up of a discussion never happened.
Well, it's sort of going on right now.
Well, yeah, because I had to. You know, if I hadn't interrupted and been rude, you still would have been talking right now. My God, you still would have been going on.
Well, no, I was done.
In Brent's defense, he didn't really have time to prepare for, his kind of job kind of got dumped on.
Yeah,
but
the other guy, he went
too far. I mean,
so 10 minutes prior to.
Also,
but I'm
thinking,
thinking, if there was strict moderation, would
well, we're not going to go to the other extreme of you holding the. Okay, stop right now. Your 10 minutes are up. Let's not get this wrong.
And we've never been. You speak. You speak.
No, I mean,
we don't want to get
to the other extreme.
I mean, perhaps I've got some hindsight bias in that sense, but I don't know. I think there's been some fascinating things. Honestly, this has been like a pretty memorable experience, you know. I mean, like the last
I'll
week.
definitely never forget it.
Anyway, perhaps we should wrap up. Does anybody else have any other things to say? Or, hey, you can interrupt me and say whatever you'd like to say. Anybody? Okay, well, hey, let's give our two panelists and lastly, tonight we have a lecture, again, like